and for the internal action. I thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Das Wort, danke, herzlich.
Thank you very much for those remarks. Christian Preda for the EPP.
Merci infiniment, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Designate, the European Parliament has worked a great deal on the putting in place of the External Action Service. Our views have not always been taken into account. Sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. And the results have been mixed. How do you intend to continue now with the work of institutional consolidation of the External Action Service? Do you intend to work closely with the Parliament? And will you live up to the pledge given by Cathy Ashton when she said that it was important for there to be people who understood, who were on the same wavelength as the European Parliament and who understood those sensitivities? And is that, do you think, the spirit which informs the replies which you have given us to our questionnaire? Thank you. First of all, thank you very much. First of all, we have the review of the service. There are certain things which have been already implemented. And there are others which will take a little bit more time in order to inspect from the inside out how things are working. I've been able to get a glimpse, an aperçu, as a minister, but I think that the practice is going to be very interesting to see the mechanisms which need changing, the instruments which have to be completely overhauled and changed. Now, I've already got an idea of what the review is throwing up, but I'll be able to see for myself. Now, just a few points. I will be working on a better mix within the structure in terms of the people and also the different levels at which the different nationalities are represented. The mix of national diplomats and EU officials, and perhaps also in terms of the age pyramid. We'll need to simplify the chain of command, and we'll be working with the special representatives as well. And I'll no doubt be able to come back on that later on. On the security strategy, that is in my replies to the questionnaire. And I think that it's going to be useful to make use of the Council in June next in order to put to Council reflections going back to December of 2013 and decisions taken then. And that will no doubt be an opportunity to launch a big public process of reflection on the strategy. It could be a white paper. Something in any case which enables us to give thought to the scenarios of the threats which exist on the horizon. Is that my 2 minutes?
Nein, 1,5 Minuten.
That was 1.5 minutes. That's the initial reply to the question. Mr. Preda, do you have a follow-up?
Oui, Madame la Commissaire.
Yes, Commissioner Designate. Can I just ask, this new strategy, is that going to involve a reassessment of our strategic partnership? You touched on the subject of Russia, and it's all a question of the words you use to describe that relationship. But there are other strategic partnerships, and it's a long list.
L'effort, c'est pas.
Thank you. It's not really a question of finding the word. It's a question of talking to our partners and finding a strategy. On the timing, I think it would not be honest of me to say that I knew all of that, but I think we do need to revise our strategy because we live in a changed world. It's very different now from what it was in the past. And with the Commission, with the Parliament, with the new Commission, we'll need to look at that and also the strategic partnerships, not just the one with Russia, but with others as well. Thank you.
Ms Mogherini, good evening. Now, some people say that EU member states don't want a strong EU foreign policy. Yet you've set a goal, and I quote from your questionnaire, for Europe to play a central role in global politics. As Italian Foreign Minister, you've been a member of the Foreign Affairs Council. What lessons do you bring with you on how you can give leadership to ensure that the EU foreign ministers are more united in pursuing this goal? Secondly, I do welcome the work of your predecessor as High Representative, but could you tell this hearing one thing that you plan to do differently from Baroness Ashton? And finally, wildlife experts say that if you're confronted by a bear, you can choose between standing close to others in your group, making as much noise as possible to present a more intimidating front, or alternatively speaking softly and reassuringly, gently retreating backwards. If you confront a Russian bear, Ms Mogherini, which tactic would you use?
I like this committee. That's the reason why I committed myself to come often. That's the best part of my job, I probably say. And that's probably answering to number 2 question. I will be present much more often. I count on having a special partnership with the European Parliament, I said. As a member of Parliament myself, I enjoy the Parliament. So it's not my duty, it's my pleasure and my interest to be here as much as possible in different formats, formal, informal, committee, the special committee. I think we can work very well together. So this is the answer to the second question. The fact, I found as a minister frustrating when it came to spending hours in discussing whether paragraph 2 had to be postponed or put before paragraph 1 or after paragraph 6. And we spent hours and hours. That's normal, that's natural. We know that conclusions are important because that's our position. But probably we can make better use of our time at the time of the ministers. If we plan also strategic thinking in that format as well. We have an excellent network to be used. We have a huge potential politically. If we manage to plan working methods so that we manage not only to run after what is already on the agenda, but also to spend some time in thinking of what could come on the agenda in 1 year. So I would try to do this for the fact. On the bear, I don't have that much experience on bears. Maybe someone from the Nordic area here might be more experienced than me. But I would say that we need a mix of assertiveness and diplomacy. The balance would also depend on the reaction of the bear.
On your point about strategic thinking, thank you for your answers, by the way, High Representative-elect. Foreign ministers will always put national interests first. No one should blame them for doing so. But to urge them and push them and prompt them to think strategically so that we better get a better EU foreign policy, how can you do that?
You know, I think that we have to get out of this national interest versus European interest. We have common interests, otherwise we wouldn't be together. The European Union has started like this. It is a matter of values, but it's also a matter of interests. And if we get to share what is in defined ways and together, the points on which we have to work together because it's our interest to work together and it's the only way to achieve things that are interesting for us, I think then the work would be a little bit easier. I don't say easy. I don't say easy, but a little bit easier. There will be fields on which this might be not possible, but there's a lot of things that we can achieve only working together, and that is a national interest working on a European interest together.
Madam High Rep Designate, you mentioned the rise of ISIS and an assertive Russia under President Putin as two of the main current threats to European security. What role do you envisage in forcing GCC countries, particularly Qatar and Saudi Arabia, to desist from funding extremist Salafist Wahhabi groups, which are at the ideological root of some of this problem, and to ensure that Turkey makes genuine efforts to prevent jihadists from crossing over from its territory? Furthermore, whilst there is EU consensus to the threat of ISIS, sadly the same cannot be said of the response to Russia, where we see continuing splits amongst the member states. In the event of Russian escalation by attempting to create a land corridor to Crimea by military means, what further EU punitive sanctions would you consider proposing to the Council? For instance, the suspension of Russian access to SWIFT, and perhaps even a call on the member states to supply Ukraine with the necessary means to defend itself.
Thank you for the questions. First, I think that the fact that we have built, that has been a large coalition, or a large partnership rather, to face and fight ISIL, I think is a positive thing. And we have to remember that it started actually here in Brussels. I was one of the foreign ministers signing a letter to Cathy Ashton asking for a Foreign Affairs Council on the 15th of August, which is not a normal day, especially in Italy and in other countries, for having and sharing a vision and a framework for a reaction, a common reaction to the threat of ISIL, at that time only mainly in one part of Iraq and obviously in Syria. And the fact that that has developed into something that we have tackled during the UN General Assembly with a format that is extremely large and broad, I think is part of the answer to your question. Having different aspects on the table, not only the military one, but also tackling finance to the movement, but also the cultural message, the religious message, the humanitarian aspect, all makes part of a strategy. And the fact that the main countries involved in the strikes were Arab countries, and that picture of the woman from the Emirates leading one of the planes in the first day was such a powerful message, I think, culturally. That could develop a different framework for the Gulf countries to relate to the region. It's a huge crisis, but it's also a huge opportunity for the different regional actors and powers to start working together as they share a common threat and maybe also common interest. The same goes for Turkey. I guess I don't have time now to elaborate on that, but what we have seen in the last weeks is quite incredible. The amount of refugees that Turkey was receiving already was huge. The amount of Kurdish refugees that in the last weeks Turkey has received is also something quite relevant. And we all know very well that in the end, the role that we can have there is to try and facilitate a dialogue between and among the regional powers in the region. I don't have time for Russia.
Herzlichen Dank. But only 20-second answer then.
Madam High Rep Designate, my group had deep reservations about the creation of the External Action Service, but it now recognises that a functioning service has been created, and Baroness Ashton, to her credit, oversaw this establishment and has left a legacy in terms of the Geneva talks aimed at preventing the acquisition of nuclear weapons by Iran, and also in the Belgrade-Pristina talks on Kosovo. How will you build on these legacies, ensuring cost neutrality from the European Union budget and providing a service that gives value added to the individual member states rather than duplication of the efforts of their national diplomatic corps?
Possible to reply in 20 seconds, so I'll take the previous question and I hope some part of it. If Russia attempts to take the corridor, I think that, first of all, we will need to stay united. It is true, member states have had different sensibilities, let's say, to this, how to manage this crisis, but we managed to stay together. among member states and with the other partners in the rest of the world. This is the most valuable added value that we have, staying united. And I think we will need to prevent this from happening, rather than thinking of how do we react if that happens.
Thank you very much, Madam High Representative Designate. In your answers to the questionnaire, you underwrite the need for unity of purpose and unity of action to strengthen the EU's comprehensive approach to external conflicts and crises, and to enable the EU to become a truly global actor. That's all very well, but what we see is that the EU struggles to juggle more than one severe crisis at a time, and that not only we struggle in meeting several crises at a time, but that most major players at the moment face the same difficulties. So my question is, how do you intend to improve and to coordinate better the analysis and response capabilities of the Commission, the EEAS, the Council, and the Presidency of the European Council, so as to really develop and strengthen the EU's response capabilities, not only as a reaction, but if possible, also as a prevention? Thank you.
Thank you. I think, as I said in the beginning of my opening speech, I think we have the tools and we have the political potential. What we have to work on is, for sure, the political will. Sometimes we get late because we spend a lot of time discussing. Sometimes we get late because we spend a lot of time deciding. We have difficult deciding lines, decision-making processes. Some of this is probably difficult or impossible to change, but much of this is possible to change. Streamline, as is the European English word I understand for doing that. But this is key. Sometimes we have even too many instruments and tools, and we have to rationalize and put them together. I think of the response to the crisis. We have different tools that we can rationalize and put together, as well as a major integration and complementarity between the different tools we have. If you think of the humanitarian aid, you think of the development cooperation, you think of even some parts of other policies that do not have anything to do, in principle, with crisis, but can prevent crisis from happening. I think of the support that we have to democracy, or even trade in some parts of it. We just need, that's why we need that coordination at the commissioners' level, so that we are aware that all our instruments and policies fit into one unique flow of policy that we should create all together. That can sound quite up in the air, but I think that if we limit ourselves to discuss about how we use one single instrument, and we lack the vision, we are constantly running after our own limits, while we need, first of all, to get the clear vision of what we need to do, and then find the right appropriate instruments and the way of putting them together to develop that and implement that.
Ja, guten Abend.
Good evening, Ms. Mogherini. As you can see, I'd like to speak to you in German. You talked about the fact that you've been here to have discussions with us before, and you said that Russia couldn't continue to be a strategic EU partner. Many of us welcomed that. As far as I'm concerned and my group is concerned, we have some practical questions arising from that. We would like to know what the position of Russia is as a key player and an important player in various areas, for example, global and nuclear disarmament and the implementation of the arms trade treaties. How are you going to integrate Russia into this process? How do you see this playing out? And how do you see involving Russia in the reform of the UN and the UN Security Council? How do you envisage making it part of establishing a democratic structure and an international structure which is more appropriate? So I should like to know what sort of strategy you would intend to use in order to try to scale back conflict between ourselves and NATO and Russia and establish a more appropriate architecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Disarmament, non-proliferation, arms control, to me is even personally a key issue. I've been working on this quite a lot as a Member of Parliament. I've been the first signatory of the ATT ratification law in the Italian Parliament, and Italy was the first country to ratify. So I have some background there, and I can also tell you that I intend to work very much on disarmament, non-proliferation and arms control as a whole, because the three issues are very much related politically. And I also intend to go to the NPT review conference next spring in New York. As a political sign, I think we have to put a lot of investment there, political investment there, because it's a matter of security. It's not an ideological issue. It's a matter of our security, because if we work seriously on disarmament and non-proliferation, the world is definitely going to become a better place or a safer place. Coming to Russia, Russia has not signed the RTT, and after the New START treaty, things are getting complicated on the nuclear side. I think we need to engage Russia again, and President Obama mentioned that during his speech at the UN General Assembly last week, a couple of weeks ago. I think this is going to be one of the terrains on which it's going to be crucial that we engage Russia for our own security. On the UN Security Council, as you know, the EU has not a common position. Let me say that it would be great if in 5 years we managed to have one, and I would be very happy to work on that, difficult as it seems. But I think that is one of those things on which our citizens sometimes ask. Aren't you or wouldn't you be able to move forward also on this?
Eben überzogen, deswegen verzichte ich jetzt.
I won't have a supplementary question, thank you, because I used all my speaking time.
Frau Mogherini, in Europas Nachbarschaft sind auf
Ms. Mogherini, in our neighbourhood, there are armed conflicts taking place where millions of people are suffering in Libya, Syria, Iraq. Thousands of people are fleeing and trying to come to Europe. Many of them have lost their lives in this endeavour. The EU is talking about imposing stronger controls on the borders of these countries. Now, how do you intend to ensure that such border controls don't restrict people's rights to leave the country to seek asylum? I'd like to say also that there's been international reaction to arms and the terrorist conflict, and there's been more and more intervention taking place. The European Union has adopted a resolution on armed drones in the light of the protection of human rights and the respect of international law, which are paramount principles. Where does the legal framework lie for you? What do you think about the use of drones which can be intended to kill and can be used by individual member states? Thank you.
Thank you. On asylum seekers and migrants, I mentioned in the beginning that I was on the 3rd of October in Lampedusa, 1 year after the tragedy that took place there. And to me, it is very clear that we have a humanitarian duty, a moral duty, even before then the political and institutional one, to protect people's life. That is Europe. That is our values. Now, there are different ways of doing that. There are more efficient and effective ways of doing that, rather than waiting until they cross the sea to do that. We have to work with the countries of origin, and that's a long-term strategy to stabilize, or to prevent crisis, or to manage crisis, or to prevent dictatorships. We need to work with the countries of transit, as we can protect and assist people fleeing in different countries of transit, with, I think, the assistance of the United Nations system, with UNHCR, that could be a very effective tool. Together, we could work on that. And we need to solve the problems at the roots. Think of Libya. We might come to that later if there's a question on that. But it's quite clear that dealing with that kind of corridor is basically impossible if we do not have a stable country and a stable government there. On drones, I am aware, I've read the European Parliament resolution. I think that as all other instruments or means or vehicles, it is the use that you do of them that makes the difference. There is not something good or bad in itself. It's the policy that is behind that makes the difference.
Supplementary?
Ja, in vielen Kriegen und Krisen.
In many wars and in many situations of crisis, war crimes are committed against humanity, and this happens on our doorsteps. We must obviously find solutions where we can bring people to justice for this. What do you see your role being? How do you think you could bring the perpetrators of such crimes to justice?
I would refer here to the historical and, to me, completely shareable role that the European Union has always played in the reference of the International Criminal Court. I think we need to use the international institutions we have, especially when they are effective, and I think that is the case.
Castaldo?
Thank you. Signor Alto Rappresentante.
High Representative, in an interview in March, picked up in your blog, shortly after the problems in Crimea, you talked about how the Union was having difficulty coming up with a single line. And then you said, and in Ukraine as well, we were late in thinking together about the crisis with regard to the association agreement. If we had done this before, making that compatible with the relationship between Ukraine and Russia, perhaps things would have developed differently. Now, that, I think, is perfectly understandable. And I may be wrong, but I think that over recent months, the line has become more rigid. Talking about Russia no longer being a strategic partner for the European Union. Now, Minister Guidi, for example, is talking about 100 million euros lost in terms of exports. Would you share my hope that soon Russia will be a partner again? What are the chances of that happening, in your opinion?
Grazie. L'intervista era di marzo.
Thank you. That was an interview in March. And of course, since March, many things have changed, not for the better either. Russia has had several opportunities to come to a path of a political solution. There have been many opportunities to talk. And I very much hope that the Minsk approach is the right one and that that will be respected in all of its detail. The complete withdrawal of Russian military personnel in Ukraine, the controls of on the frontiers. Now, on the question of the association agreement, now there was much there which was straightforward. The agreement could have been used to defuse tensions. It could have been favourable for Ukraine, and perhaps that was the way that this should have been approached. Many shared my assessment at the time. And I don't think that that really is much of a revelation. That's simply a statement of the obvious. That we could have had more discussion and taken longer over that period. And that might have helped things along if there had been more time taken over it.
Yes, thanks. Volevo chiederle, il ritorno all'integrazione.
Thank you very much. A return to Ukraine's territorial integrity, is that a precondition for a resumption of talks with Russia and an end to the sanctions? Is that likely? Do you think that Russia is going to abandon its control over Crimea? How can you prevent member states going their own way in such situations and not having a united approach? Thank you. The principles of international legality must always be respected, and this is a starting point for the European Union, and we cannot have move away from that. It's also true that what we can do in Ukraine at this time, and indeed before and going forward, it really must be, first and foremost, a decision of the Ukrainians, and it's a question of ownership. President Poroshenko was elected only a few months ago and has brought results, and I think that his role there in terms of ownership is essential.
Gentile Commissario designato, lei
Commissioner designate, in your responses you said that you would commit yourself to guarantee coherence between internal and external European security policy. All well and good. In the light of that, I'd like to ask you about two different strands of this. We've heard from the representative on terrorism that he perceives there to be a very, very serious problem in the shape of the 3,000 fundamentalists who are fighting in Iraq and elsewhere and may possibly come back to the European Union. If this happens, then what do you think the police in Europe would do? They are clearly very fearful about this sort of eventuality because there is no proper European data available on this. And this brings me to the whole question of PNR data, which we need to look at from a very realistic point of view. There are huge dangers facing us, and this is a major challenge. And in the light of that, I'd like to say to you, perhaps more in your capacity as a national minister, that it is all too easy for people to infiltrate the European Union. People can get through Fiumicino Airport, people can land on the frontiers of Italy, on our borders, by boat and other ways, and the borders are permeable, and this is something that we have to resolve throughout Europe. Thank you very much. Well, I am still the Italian Foreign Minister, and indeed I will be so until such time as the European Parliament has taken its vote, but I'm a Minister only of Foreign Affairs in Italy. And so I shall answer from that perspective. I think the whole issue of the foreign competence is a question, first and foremost, of prevention. We're obviously concerned about how we can deal with this. We do have to stop them coming back, but it would be better to tackle the problem further upstream. It's a very major problem, and it's one that you have to look at in a more flexible way. You can't have too fixed an approach. Therefore, for example, perhaps the Ministers of Foreign Affairs could be working with the Ministers of Justice and the Home Office in order to try to find a coordinated approach. And it may be something that we could promote at European level.
Grazie, brevemente.
Thank you. Just very briefly.
Now, Mrs. Fortiga.
Thank you, Chair. Madam High Representative Designate, instead of secure neighborhood as provided within the European security strategy, we do have burning borders. This situation requires special and timely addressing of threats. How are you going to address this situation in terms of policies, the EU policies within the CSDP possibilities, and also in terms of institutions and capabilities?
Thank you. I think we have a lot of instruments and a lot of potentials after the Lisbon Treaty is in place. We have not necessarily used that so far But it's also true that so far we haven't had the crisis or the burning borders you referred to. So it is quite clear to me that I will have to work with different stakeholders to work on that. But for sure, working on developing our defense and security policy is going to be priority. I cannot say priority number one because I have quite some priority number ones, I guess, but in the first circle of priorities. First, we need to work on the cooperation on defense. We need to use the defense agency. That's going to be one of the things we'll discuss with the defense ministers already in November. I think the FAC in the format of the defense minister is going to be the first one I'm going to chair. And we need to work together on that side. Because I think it's time not only for budget reasons, but also for strategic reasons to work much more together also in the defense sector. Thank you.
Yes. No. How you envision the role of NATO and within this of the United States in enhancing our common security?
As I said, and then we were colleagues at the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, so you might know that from that times. I think that cooperation on security with NATO is strategic. And I have planned already informally, because the decision is yours in a couple of weeks' time, but with Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg to meet in the first week of my mandate to work together on that. Obviously, we have different formats, different capabilities, different budgets for defense, different approaches from time to time, but I think it is extremely relevant to work together. When we mention the comprehensive approach among ourselves, I think we also need a comprehensive approach with our partners, including NATO.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to speak about the coherence with development policy and humanitarian aid. You mentioned your role in coordinating within the Commission. How do you see that working in practice, and how will you work with the Commissioners for Development Aid and for humanitarian aid? How will you make sure that you prioritise the needs-based approach while remaining by ensuring that we have proper consideration of human rights issues? You mentioned, for example, the SDGs in 2015 and the importance of that. How will we speak with one voice in a coherent way in the EU?
This is one of the questions to which I probably managed to answer after a couple of months rather than before. How do we manage to do that? The intention is there, and the positive thing is that I see that all the other commissioners designate share this sense of not duty, not we need to do that because somebody decides that, but a sense of urgency from the things that are happening around us. Think of the emergencies that we are facing. Either we work together with the different instruments we have, either we just fail, and still we fail with each and every of our single policy or action functioning. Which is the big paradox of our instruments, of our policies. Think of Ebola. We have quite an amount of money there. We know what is needed. We have different actors doing different things. We just need a coordinating center to make sure that things are done where they are needed, when they are needed, in the way in which they are needed, and sometimes you just need the center of the net to make things happen properly.
Yes, you mentioned Ebola, and that's causing a huge strain on Africa at the moment. How do you see the relationship between the EU and Africa developing in the next few years? Do you have any particular views about it yourself or any priorities? Sorry. How do you see the future with relationship with Africa? You mentioned Ebola. How do you see it progressing?
Yeah, first of all, I would really like that we consider Africa not just or not only a problematic part of the problem list. Africa has also huge potential in terms of democracy, in terms of population, in terms of economy, energy, environment, development, human development. So I would see Africa as a partner, not as a receiver of our donors' fatigue sometimes or enthusiasm, depending on who we are and where we stand. So I really believe that we will need to work with Africa more than working in Africa.
Bernd Lange.
Dankeschön, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you, Chairman. Mrs. Mogherini, in your new job, you will have responsibility for consistency with other policy areas, such as, for example, trade. I'd like to ask 3 questions in this area. How will you ensure consistency and policy coherence, in particular with Article 21 of the Treaty and trade policy? Secondly, would you be prepared to withdraw trade preferences if there are attacks on human rights, on workers' rights, or against the environment? And then thirdly, how do you intend to ensure that the EEAS will accompany and monitor the implementation of these trade agreements? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. This is one of the areas where we will need to work more, not only with the Commissioner designate, Cecilia, but also with the whole Commission, because all the trade agreements, and in particular the ones that are most strategic to us, have different aspects, not only in trade, but not only in foreign policy, but also on many other different dossiers. So I think that we will need to share in the college much of the decisions and of the responsibilities of the things that you have said. There's clearly a human rights dimension there. To me, it would be a very clear point to put human rights, workers' rights, especially working with the relevant UN agencies competent for that, at the center of our work, in a coordinated work with the rest of the Commission. On the EEAS work on that, I will, as I said, take some weeks, I would say, let's say 100 days, that's fair, to assess from the inside what in the structure and the way the structure follows the different dossiers work, what can work better, what can be revised in the immediate terms, in the future. I could give some more concrete answers now, but I will be completely frank with you. In some cases, especially relating to the functioning of the EEAS, that would be either the result of my experience as a minister, which would not be fair, or a result of the briefing I've read, which is very good, but not enough.
Supplementary? No, thanks. Dann kommen wir zu den normalen Fragen.
Now we get to the 1-minute questions, 2 minutes answers. And first we have Arnaud Danjean for the EPP.
Thank you. Commissioner designate, you're talking about defense policy. And over the last 5 years, it's been a bit absent, or at least it hasn't been one of the clear priorities. In spite of a strategic context in crisis and cuts in all national budgets. Now, so this is a responsibility that, of course, falls to member states first and foremost. However, it's also important to take initiative at the European level and look at priorities. Now, it's easy to talk about ideology and say that the EU should only partake in civilian missions, and it should give up on any military intervention or mission, and because that's the remit of NATO and other organizations. And so the EU should just be some sort of super NGO without any military vision. What do you think of that kind of position? Well, thank you very much for the question. I think, yes, it's true. And that, of course, the EU has a role to play. That's enshrined in the treaties in this area. And I think, given the current context, it would be timely to work on this. And this has also been indicated in the most recent European Council. And I would like to also work specifically to follow up on the decisions, particularly from the Council in December 2013. And we'll have time to assess and try to come up with concrete positions. I think that we particularly need to work on to really try to link up defense activities and other Commission activities in the civilian realm and also the military one. Because we do have a military realm. And in my experience, the military cooperation we do have does work very well. But of course, this is also a matter of politics. And you know, just like I do, that this is up to member states, really. Having said that, we do need to work in this area. And I'm going to visit the European Defence Agency there, and I'm going to work very closely with the Ministers of Defence. And we certainly need to work with our other partners, particularly NATO. But there's also unharnessed potential in the Lisbon Treaty. And so I hope that in the next 5 years, if the political conditions exist, then maybe we can use that to the fullest.
Grazie. Signora Mogherini, the question is, how do you intend to stop Russia's invasion of Ukraine, if not by increased Russia sanctions and by selling arms to Ukraine? And are you in favor of both? Because diplomacy does not work. We don't want the military confrontation. Ceasefire is not existing. Aggression continues. Minsk agreement was commented by Ukrainians who listen to you now as a naive diplomacy to believe that it may be implemented. So how do you intend to prepare us for the worst case scenario? Because before you said that you count that somehow problems will work out, but the wisdom of strategists, and you should be a strategist, is to prepare us for the worst case scenario. And lastly, how to turn your Achilles heel, as perceived initially as Eastern policy, into your strong arm, as you declare. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You know, I think the military people have a say, which is prepare for the worst and work for the best. Is that only an Italian say? And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I think that we have to work day by day by day with the Ukrainian authorities, with President Poroshenko, to try and make his own efforts of dialogue and diplomacy work. His own efforts. The efforts of the President of Ukraine, the efforts of the new parliament in Ukraine once they will have the elections in a couple of weeks. That is going to be our role, I think. Prepare for the worst? Sure. That's possible. And we have to do it on different levels. I don't believe that that would be the case on the military side. Even in the Wales NATO summit, that was completely shared. No military way to solve the crisis in Ukraine. Starting from the Ukrainians, that we have to listen. We have to listen to their words, because they have the ownership of their country, or they should have the ownership of the country, and we have to, at last, allow them to have the ownership on how they lead the country out of the crisis. But we need to prepare, yes, in energy terms, for sure. We need to work maybe even on increasing the sanctions, as we can increase the sanctions if things get worse. We could lift the sanctions if things get better. that is the flexibility of the instrument, but we will need to increase more and more the support to the political efforts that Ukraine leadership is trying to achieve. Difficult, almost impossible as it is. But if we do not stand at their side and help them in trying to achieve this, with the difficult and complicated, tensy political situations they have, dealing with an electoral campaign, with the winter that is going to be probably a nightmare from the economic point of view, from the energy point of view, with elections coming up, with a war on their territory, if we do not stand at their side when they say we need to try and find a political solution, who else will be?
Thank you. Das Wort hat Maria Gabriel.
Maria Gabriel.
Madam Commissioner Designate, the Arab Spring resonated in the southern Mediterranean. However, the situation has developed greatly since then. Now, we have a neighborhood policy, and we should try to take into account the differences between different countries and differentiated approaches. However, we mustn't neglect regional dimensions, particularly in long term, because we don't want to see the positive developments in certain countries always under threat from regional instability. So, do you have a plan for stabilizing the region? And what kind of initiatives could you take in the framework for the Mediterranean in human rights? And on religious radicalization, how can we work with our African partners to really work against these hubs of religious radicalization that are emerging on the African continent and which we must not neglect? Thank you. Yes, I think that we must back up the countries in the region that are successful. But that's not necessarily always the case. I've talked about Tunisia and Morocco. We shouldn't just use the Union for the Mediterranean, which of course is very useful and can be very useful to the European Union, but we must also use other formats, for example 5+5, which worked very well in these recent months in the context of the Libya crisis. Because then we can have at the same table neighboring European countries, because of course we are neighbors, we share in the ocean, Arab countries and also African countries. And I do think that the Mediterranean in general is an area where we have similar stakeholders but very different crises. And when you arrive at the Middle East in itself, you have other stakeholders with which we have to engage or not, but we have to take account of them. And when you work on Libya or Morocco or Tunisia, you always have to also look towards the south. So I do think that it would be useful if the EU first and foremost understands that it is an actor in this region, not just because we have Mediterranean countries, but we need to understand that the EU itself is an actor in that region. And I hope to have more time to answer those other questions later.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner Designate. I have two questions to ask you. Together, Europeans now spend only 18% on the world's military appropriations against 30% we spent 10 years ago. This has certainly contributed to exposing European border areas to hybrid war, I mean little green men, to frozen conflicts that are mushrooming on our doorstep. What initiatives and policies you are going to propose to strengthen common European defence policy? And second question is very much related to that. How do you intend further the transformation of Eastern Partnership countries into more democratic societies based on rule of law in view of Russian attempts to establish Soviet sphere of influence there? Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the budget for defense, there is a long-lasting debate in all our member states, I think, in different formats. What I think is that we need to work, and that is particularly for us, European Union, to work on the output, as working on the input, meaning the amount of money, is not completely in our hands, in these hands. And that's why I was insisting on the necessity to work more on defense cooperation. That is strategic to the pooling and sharing, just to make the title. Because if we have a chance of being more effective on the military side, it's putting together the capabilities we have. So I think that on that, working with the defense ministers, working with the EEAS, I think we will have to develop this pooling and sharing approach in concrete. On the attempt of having a sort of Russian influence completely affirmed on certain of our eastern neighbors, I think we have probably the biggest challenge there in terms of cultural identity of the European Union. I think the attempt that the Russians are trying to have is that of showing that the European choice is bad for the people in those countries. And that's why I insist so much in supporting those countries' transition in delivering to their citizens. If we show, and if we manage to show together, that the European choice is good for the citizens in these countries. I think of Moldova, election coming up now, difficult ones. I think of Georgia. I think obviously to Ukraine. If the European choice is delivering concrete good results for the people, that would be an attractive pull factor also for areas or parts of their societies that are probably thinking in a different way today. Sorry.
Das Wort hat Lorenzo Cesa.
Next, Lorenzo Cesa. Minister Mogherini, can I express my satisfaction that you have been chosen as the candidate for High Representative? I'm convinced, having seen you working as a colleague in the Council of Europe and in the National Parliament in Italy, that you'll do your level best and that you will bring your competence and your track record to your task, and that this will be good for the European Union in this area. Now, my question, the religious minorities in the Middle East are under threat. 200 million Christians suffering persecution, particularly in Syria and Iraq, people having to leave their homes. They are in need of all kinds of assistance, including medical care. Given the serious situation, what do you intend to do as High Representative to address some of these problems?
Sostegno per l'amicizia.
Thank you very much for your words of support and friendship and for your questions. And through you, I'd like to thank the Parliament for the work it's done in that area. And I'm sure that you will continue, will keep up, as it were, the good work. This is an important job, to have more focus on human rights. The European Parliament has got a track record and credibility in this area, which I think we can build our common endeavour on. When it comes to religious freedoms and the situation of Christians in the world, in certain parts of the world, it's important for us to repeat, and this is being repeated at various levels and in voices in authoritative terms. Human freedoms are human rights, and they are a measure of the degree of civilization and culture. There are areas in North Africa, in the Middle East and elsewhere. We have an EU Special Representative on human rights. And of course, we work with the United Nations. And it is important for us to work together in order to address these problems in very practical ways. Now, my final remark in response is this. Another important element, and this is true in Iraq and in other parts of the world, let's not forget that humanitarian assistance must get through to all of the communities, and we can work there with as commissioners designate in order to coordinate the effort. We need to have a policy which involves the different authorities, and we must have a policy to get the assistance through, and that's what we must all seek to do. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank. Die letzte Frage war von dem.
That was the last question from the EPP, Mr. Chesa. And now S&D Antonio Panzeri.
Grazie. Signora
Thank you very much. Ms. Mogherini, the preamble to the Charter of Fundamental Rights says that the European Union must put the individual at the heart of its policy. Now, how do you intend to implement this in real terms? And how do you intend to ensure that these inviolable rights of every individual are no longer breached? What is happening in the Mediterranean is the antithesis of the principles espoused by this charter, and to which Juncker has alluded in his early days in office. I think you should still have some time to give us an outline of your structural approach, but could you tell us, at least in broad terms, about your time frame for taking these initiatives? When would you intend to do something about strengthening the roles of the special representatives, and when will you have in place a new coordinating structure, a horizontal structure within which your various commissioners can meet? Thank you. Well, it won't take me more than a few months to get these initiatives off the ground, but I can tell you a little more about some of them in the short amount of time I have, and I will be delighted to talk with you both individually and collectively about it on subsequent occasions, and also to the special representatives. First of all, the work of the special representative in recent years, as I think you and I would agree, has been very, very positive, and therefore enhancing this role is something that I think would be effective. As to work on human rights, this is something that's an integral part, core business or hardware of our foreign policy. It's not an add-on. And it is in our interest that it be so, because it isn't a question of deciding between stability or human rights. It's a question of trying to guarantee both in as short a time frame as possible. And this is why we need a cross-cutting approach. And we need to involve the commissioners, not only those who are responsible for external policy areas, but also those who have internal policy remits, because we have a responsibility to mainstream the respect for human rights both within and out with the confines of the European Union. And it is a weighty responsibility. We have exacting standards which we exact of others in terms of respect of human rights, and we can ask no less of ourselves. And the other and final point on human rights at this juncture, it's not just an institutional matter, it's something that has to be part of our structural dialogue with civil society NGOs, both within Europe and out in third countries. And I think it's important that we start with those which are most accustomed to working in the most difficult areas. Of course, freedom of the press is something which is fundamental. It's fundamental to foreign policy and domestic policy. I've talked about the question of women, the situation of women, because in some parts of the globe, and not only outside the European Union, there are particular problems facing women. Therefore, it's important that we build alliances throughout civil society, that we have a proper structure and system for ensuring the respect of human rights both within the European Union and out with it, and this will enhance the credibility of our foreign policy.
Signora Mogherini, Many times the EU has been criticized for the lack of political will, especially when it comes to security and defense matters. In fact, in part, this is due to the differing threat perceptions of the member states and a lack of mutual sensitivity to their respective concerns. In your opinion, can a new European security strategy, revised in the light of the latest developments, contribute to alleviate this problem? Thank you.
I hope so. that's the easiest question. You know, I think that as I touched on this a little bit before, I think that we would be wrong if we believe that the threats perceived by some of the member states are not also affecting other member states. We are one community. And if there is a threat perceived somewhere, it's a threat perceived and has to be a threat perceived everywhere, in my opinion. And that's also why I said we need to pay more attention to the East and to the South at the same time and stop this paradoxical image of, you know, either one or the other. We simply cannot afford choosing, because we have problems coming from East and from South, and we have to do the things together. That's why I say I'll try to start by the building blocks. If we start a reflection on the strategy, on the security strategy, and on the vision, we will need to secure our people and also the other people in the world, because Europe is more and more should be more and more a security provider. I think there is a lot that we can share in terms also of perception of threats.
Gentile Alto Rappresentante designato.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Designate, High Representative Designate, you are going to be looking at problems of direct concern to Italy. For example, the Marò, the military personnel from Italy currently who were kidnapped and who are still in India. And of course, there have been changes, and you have demonstrated your determination and also your competence. And I'm sure that you'll do all you can to ease up and to solve that problem. This is not just bilateral. It's not just a matter between Italy and India. But I think that this question of the Marò, who are in India, I think it's got implications and has wider implications for our relationship with India. Thank you very much. As I said, I will be Italian Foreign Minister until after the vote in the Parliament. And I can tell you that the time I've been Minister and the time I continue to be Minister, I will do all I can to find a solution to this problem of the Italian Marò, the military personnel in India. And I think that much has been done already. The European Union has made representations several times at the highest level and has asked those questions. President Barroso, Cathy Ashton, Mr. Brok, yourself. And this controversy, as all controversies between member states and third countries, is something of direct concern to the High Representative. The important thing is to push for the, respect for international law in the best interest of all concerned. These are fundamental legal principles needed to uphold the position of Italy, the European Union and India itself. And those principles are sacrosanct. The third point, what can we do? I can facilitate dialogue between Italy as an EU partner and India on this subject. Now, I think all of us are aware, and this is in line with President Schulz and President Barroso and what they have done in the past. This is what's needed. in order to get a positive solution, and this, if anything, will strengthen the partnership between the EU and India.
Assis.
Mr. Assis, please.
Mogherini, na sua intervenção inicial teve o cuidado de referir a importância do...
Thank you very much. Now, you talked about the importance of the relationship between the EU and Latin America in general. However, what kind of political initiatives would you take in order to contribute to overcome the impasse in the signing of an association agreement between the EU and Mercosur? This process has been underway for many years now. Of course, this has both trade implications and economic implications. Now, we're talking a lot about the TTIP right now, which is being negotiated with the US. However, we must not lose sight of the fact that we need to strengthen the political, cultural, economic, and trade relationships with the Mercosur countries. So, what level of priority will you afford this objective? Thank you.
Dankeschön, Herr Bilder. Nein.
If you want, I can skip it.
There's so much.
I would take it as a political sign
much
to Latin
Italian
America.
understanding, so this nochmal. Federica.
Grazie. Posso rispondere in italiano? Tra le lingue latine o mediterranee.
Perhaps reply in Italian, one of the other Mediterranean Latin languages. 2 months ago exactly, in Santiago, in Chile, with the Secretary General of CELAC, we were discussing this exact subject. And I said on that occasion, and I think that this will have been, this will show on the record, I said that the partnership between the European Union and Latin America and the Caribbean can become ever more fundamental and key. We have a common basis, cultural, historical, shared roots, and also much in common in political terms with domestic structures. For all the differences, there's much commonality between Latin America, and we can understand the situation, the lie of the land. I think that there's room for a bigger political investment on our part and also on the part of Latin America to ensure that the partnership can meet its full potential. And this, I think, is valid for Mercosur, for the other regional organizations in Latin America as well. Each of them, in their various configurations, their different format and their different political location. The important thing is that we deploy greater political energies to that end, not just in Latin America, but also in the Caribbean. And we'll have many opportunities. The EU CELAC summit in June can be, for once, not just business as usual in a negative sense. It can be a real opportunity to relaunch our desire to work on a reinforced basis together, not just with our strategic partners, but with the entire continent.
Herr Bilder.
Ja, dank u wel.
Thank you very much indeed, President. I shall speak Dutch, Ms. Mogherini. High Representative Designate, the destabilization in regional areas close to us, further afield, caused by Hamas, caused by Al-Qaeda, Yamakusta, and other organizations, has shown us, if we ever needed an illustration, of the fact that there is a huge need for greater security and that the European Union has got to contribute to trying to bring this about. Do you agree with me? And if you do, how do you think we can factor this into common foreign and security policy? Thank you.
Yes, I do agree that there is a major threat coming from all around us. But that is a threat, first of all, to the people living in the region. I don't know if you share this vision with me. The first victims of ISIL are Muslims. There are also Christians. There are also other communities, but the first victim are Muslims. And that's a vision that I think we need to bring. The cultural message we give today, I think, is part of the strategy to face the threat. Because the narrative that ISIL is using is a narrative that is aimed at proclaiming itself a state while actually destroying the state concept, the borders, the state authority. On the other side, saying we use a religion against the others and against the other religions, and that has no base neither in Islam, neither in any of the world's religions. So I think that the cultural message that comes especially from Europe is a very powerful tool to face the threat. We have other tools. We have the military one that is at the moment for the member states to exercise. Some have chosen to use it, some others not, some others in different forms. I think what was important and what I would do in the future, again, is and was to build a common framework for the European Union to act in the same direction. There are and there will be capacities that are and staying in the member states' hands, but if these capacities and these decisions are included in a framework that indicates the direction and indicates the strategy and puts together the efforts get to a better result, and we avoid going in different directions and speaking with different voices. Then we have the humanitarian aspect of it. It's huge, and it might be fueling other... oh, I'm sorry, I finished my time.
Madam High Rep Designate, I'm speaking on behalf of my ECR colleague Geoffrey Van Orden, who sadly can't be with us this evening, and he's asked me that I pose these specific questions to you on his behalf. Which CSDP military activities do you believe have to be carried out by the EU because they cannot be performed by NATO or by a coalition of willing nations? And secondly, do you believe that the main purpose of CSDP is political, with the aim of promoting European integration and helping the EU become a global political actor?
I think the missions or operations that we have are not there because nobody else can do it. Are there because it's good that we do it. I don't know if that answers the questions, but I wouldn't take the approach of, we do things only if they're left apart from others, being them member states or NATO. And on the other side, we do have missions and operations that are working in very close relation with member states' operation missions and with NATO operations and missions. So an integrated approach, I think, is wise and useful politically. What was the second part of the question? I'm sorry, I missed the political. Yes. It is. But again, I wouldn't spend so much time questioning why, rather than doing the right thing and doing it properly. It might be an exercise that builds a common sense of ownership for sure. But the main reason for doing that is not that we need something to keep us together. The main point is doing something useful for our security and for the security of the other people.
Demismarker.
Dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman. Commissioner, High Representative Designate. This ambition of putting human beings at the centre of our external policy, three problems. There is a UN Convention Against Torture, but then that was 30 years ago that was signed. But we've seen a deterioration around the world and not enough dedication or resolve in the European Union to turn torture into a big issue. As High Rep, will you constantly insist that that be high up the agenda? Secondly, the Parliament adopted a resolution on organ trafficking in China. And what are you going to do to push that with the Chinese to stop those practices and make sure that there is a transparent investigation and make sure that all the prisoners of conscience and in particular those in Hong Kong are released? Thank you.
Bitte sehr.
Yes, I'm more than willing to bring the issue of torture, as I mentioned, all other issues related to human rights, not only high on the agenda, but at the core of our policy. I would work, first of all, I think we have a lot of expertise, not only internally, but also in the civil society organizations to refer to and to work together with. I mentioned the need for building an alliance, and I think that is very valuable. We have to empower civil society organizations and human rights activists in the countries where they are more challenged, and I think that is going to be part of my tasks to raise it wherever I can, but not only to raise the issue, mainly and mostly to make a difference. And that will also relate to China. I think that is going to be, for sure, part of the topics on the discussions with the Chinese authorities. What I will try to do is to engage different countries, not only pointing them what they should change, but trying to work with them to make them change some of the policies on some of the practices, which I believe is the most effective way of dealing with human rights. You mentioned Hong Kong in the last part of your question, if I'm not wrong, but I'm sorry I didn't get the translation completely right. Not for the fault of the translators; that's wonderful. Just for me, I take the chance of mentioning the issue of Hong Kong here in these 20 seconds I have. I am quite satisfied by the fact that today we have rather good news rather than terrible news coming from there. And I think that is mainly in the interest not only of the people of Hong Kong and of the authorities of Hong Kong, but also of the Chinese authorities to solve the issue of the next elections in 2017 in a satisfactory way for all through dialogue.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Schaake.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Schaake.
High Representative Designate, you said think big, but I hope the EU will act decisively. Now, you've mentioned recently that Iran can be a constructive partner. My question is how? And how would you see your role in the P5+1 negotiations as High Representative? And related to that, how will you make sure that the EU still pushes for the human rights of the Iranian people and raises other important issues effectively, and that not all efforts are put into the nuclear negotiations, which I gather you are optimistic about, but which may end soon or could drag on for a very long time if there is no comprehensive deal?
Thank you very much for the question. I said, and I still believe, Iran could play a constructive role and could play a destructive role in the region and in different conflicts we have in the region. That's why I think it's right to engage Iran and trying to see if it can, instead of being a spoiler in some conflicts around the area, being part of the solution. That is also to be seen, but I think it would be quite realistic to think that we need at least to try, as we did for Iraq, basically, try to talk to people that can have an influence inside countries at the moment. On the P5+1 negotiations, you know very well the negotiations are going on until November 24th. The decision in July was taken during not the last round, the previous round of talks, that Cathy Ashton would continue her role until the 24th of November, and I think that is extremely wise. You obviously do not change negotiator in the last weeks of a difficult, very difficult negotiation. I have talked not only to Cathy and to the other ministers involved, but also to Zarif, to the Iranian foreign minister during the UN General Assembly in New York a couple of weeks ago. I believe that either we get to an agreement on the 24th, before the 24th of November, either it will be extremely complicated to get one afterwards. And I really hope that it would be possible to reach that agreement by that time. On that has nothing nothing to do, I would say, with human rights. The two things has to stay completely separate. Human rights are so important and too important to get inside any other kind of negotiation. As we say that we they discuss the nuclear file, regardless the regional role of Iran, the same should go for human rights, and they would always raise the issue of human rights with the Iranian authorities.
Dank. Herr Maura Barandiaran.
Gracias.
Thank you. High Representative Designate, I would like to ask you about the bilateral treaty between the EU and Cuba. A treaty that hopefully will link opening up the economy with developing freedom on the island. However, unfortunately, talks are not focusing on fundamental rights for the Cuban population. Therefore, I'd like to ask you, first, do you agree that the economic reforms of the Castro regime are merely superficial? And secondly, do you intend to embark on a constructive dialogue on the situation of human rights in that country with the Cuban authorities? And if that is so, then how would you monitor the correct implementation of the clauses on such rights, and what kind of role can the European Parliament play in such monitoring? And finally, High Representative Designate, if you are confirmed, could you please, during your mandate, make sure that the rights enshrined in the charters of fundamental rights reign supreme over economic rights throughout your mandate? Thank you.
Tornerò sicuramente se me lo...
Yes, if I can, and if you allow me, I will certainly come back to this in a very few months' time. But the decision lies in your hands, obviously, as to whether we have that meeting in that format and what future steps are taken. What I can tell you right here and now is that I certainly believe that it is important for us to support the opening up that has taken place so far on the part of the authorities. Of course, there's scope for more. I wouldn't deny that. But from both an economic point of view and a political point of view, we have seen some opening up, and we need to encourage that, and we need to try to drive it forward in any way that we can help to do, so that it takes a firmer root and goes forward as we would like to see. Of course, I am prepared to establish, within the limits of the possible, a constructive dialogue on human rights with the Cuban authorities. I think it would be very useful, and I'd certainly like to do this in conjunction with our Special Representative on Human Rights. It would be a pleasure for me to share this work with you, and I think that it would be useful if we could indeed do this together. Thank you.
Mogherini.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Mogherini, I welcome the emphasis you gave to the policy coherence between our internal and external policies. I also like the way in which you covered all directions and dimensions in our external relations and policies. As the northernmost member of the Parliament, I appreciate the attention you paid to the northern dimension and the Arctic. I have a question concerning the global role of the Union. We are the leading power in the world in 3 policy areas: trade, development, and the environment. We should be able to strengthen our global role by coordinating our global action and by making it more coherent. Do you believe that you can make this happen together with the other commissioners responsible for the external policies, and how are you going to make it happen?
I will try. I will try and do all my best and put all my energy in it. Setting high ambitions, I think we need to do that. As you said, we are probably the most credible and also powerful actor when it comes to trade, development, to environment, but also to other sectors. These three are clear. It's difficult to say now how we are going to coordinate. I think the coordination starts from, and that might be a very Mediterranean approach, and I'm sorry for that, even if the Arctic is in my heart. I believe it's a beautiful and strategic region. I believe that the coordination starts from sharing ideas, concerns, priorities, and tools. That's why we will see if this monthly meetings we organize with the other commissioners, not only the external ones, also some of the internal ones that have external impact. And we know that we need that, especially for environment sides. We need that a lot, but also for trade and development. Once we start sharing visions, priorities, and instruments, we will see if we manage to make the machine work together. That is the challenge, I think, to give the political to share politically and to give the political input to the different structures we have, which are powerful and big and rich of resources and talents, to work together. That is the challenge, number one. On the global issues, I really think that, when I look at what we do in Haiti or in the Horn of Africa, it's huge. It just piece by piece by piece by piece. And if we manage to get everything together and shape it politically, it would become much more relevant, probably, and it would become much more visible. And we know that political visibility is also part of the policy, because something that becomes visible also becomes more powerful and more attractive to others. And on environment and on global change, we will need to work in particular this year, coming to Lima in December and then Paris next year, to make it a success. If it's not a success, difficult to imagine a further success in the future.
Thank you. Ivo Weigel.
Spoštovana gospa ministrica.
Madam Commissioner Designate, the day when you were in Lampedusa, I was in Addis Ababa, and I convinced myself there that the great numbers of refugees will be even greater in the future if we do not manage to prepare a structured policy for Africa. However, at this point, I may say that thank you that you decided to prepare such a policy. Secondly, you also stressed international law. If the European Union is adamant in using this law, we would be an even more powerful player. For instance, when it comes to Gorno-Karabakh on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and Morocco occupation of the Western Sahara. Are we going to use the instruments that are available to us when someone is in breach of international law?
Please.
Thank you. It's very symbolic that you were in Addis Ababa and I was in Lampedusa, because that is exactly the route. To me, what was more impressive, meeting the relatives, the families and of the victims in Lampedusa and the survivors, was not so much the number and the stories of the people that died, but the story of the people that survived. Because we see the tragedy at sea, but often we do not see the tragedy before they get to the sea. And that is exactly what I think we should work on with a priority. It's a story of torture. It's a story of abuse of human rights for women, for children, for men, that normal, in most cases, I think it's for Lampedusa, for the flows through Libya to Italy, it's about 70% are asylum seekers. So not economic migrants. It's people coming out of crisis, conflicts, extreme poverty. So yes, we definitely need a structured policy for Africa, for the sake of Africa and for our own sake, I would say. International law, are we ready to use the instruments? I think that yes, for sure, we might be ready for using the instruments, but first of all, we would need to create the conditions for making the reference to the international law instruments not necessary. Preventive policy is what we really need. Because if you look around us, all the crises we have around, all of them, some, you mentioned Palestinian and Israeli conflict, are there for ages and decades, actually. I've been growing up with this. Others, we could see them coming. We just didn't act on time to prevent them. And I think that is what we need to do in particular as European Union, rather than thinking of how we sanction afterwards, how we make sure that crises do not blow up.
Danke sehr. Herr Kuso.
Thank you, Mr. Kuso Permui.
Commissioner Designate, the situation in Iraq and Syria is a consequence of Western policies over the last 20 years. You'll probably understand me better if I pay a little tribute to Bernardo Bertolucci. If he had to direct 1900 today, he would probably show us that Islamic fundamentalism, just like fascism, is not like a mushroom. It doesn't just spring up overnight. It has actually been planted by Western powers that wanted them and paid for them, and that with fundamentalists, the Western powers have gained ever more, up until the point where they didn't even know what to do with all the oil. And then they took us to war, and it's always the same people who pay for that. It's the young, and it's the people who only want to live life in dignity and in peace. And the so-called Islamic State is a consequence of the invasion of Iraq and interference in Syria. And so it cannot be a surprise that we see this situation after years of war. Do you think we have to continue along these lines and continue to feed sectarian factions with arms? Are you committed to the unity of Iraq and Syria?
Fondamentali.
Yes, I think it's fundamental that we have a coherent, unified approach here. But I also think that it is an absolute duty for us to offer assistance where we can. The question of supplying arms is not something that only the European Union is competent to do. And supplying arms to a terrorist organisation which is threatening the lives of civilian people is obviously not something that one can do. One could then perhaps supply arms to the people who were opposing them. But we need to have a political coordinated approach here, and we need to ensure that we are working to create conditions where we can scale back the extremists. There's a great deal of poverty, there's a great deal of insecurity, both economic and social. There's a huge amount of poverty, there's a huge amount of division, exclusion, people who are unable to participate in society, who feel they have no stake in society. And this is, of course, conducive to recruitment, to radicalization by terrorist organizations. And I think that the European Union and all of us individually have got to show a commitment to trying to reverse this worrying trend. We need to try to improve the living and working conditions. We need to try to enhance democracy, improve economic and social and living conditions in all the countries around the European Union. And that would certainly reduce the resources of the terrorist organizations who are radicalizing people who are absolutely desperate.
Iglesias.
Gracias, señor presidente. Buenas tardes.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, High Representative Designate. I'm usually very harsh and critical, but I'm going to make an exception tonight. I'm going to make an exception because I think everybody needs to have a chance, and I also feel that some of the criticism that's been leveled at you has, made you seem like a very nice person to me. You know, you've been called pro-Russian. You've been said that you're not an expert on these matters. You're a low-profile person. I don't think so. I think you're a very well-prepared person, and I think you have a great common sense. And common sense is something we need in this committee. You say you're going to come here for pleasure. Well, you have perhaps a strange sense of pleasure, but you know, we've heard that some people say they can't listen to Wagner because then they would want to invade Poland. But some people here seem to listen so much to Wagner that they want to invade Russia. So you replied to Mr. Castaldo that the principles of international legality should always be complied with. So the European attitude, which has been so belligerent towards Russia, doesn't that clash with Europe's benevolence towards Israel, which always also infringes international norms of legality and human rights? Thank you.
Non prenderò la domanda sul.
Well, let's not get into people's tastes and preferences in those areas. When there is a political disagreement, this is a parliament where people do disagree with each other. And I think that's useful for the work which lies ahead of us in our various ways and subject to the restrictions we all face. But it's also useful and invigorating if, in intellectual terms. This is a kind of examination, it's a kind of test. And it's very interesting because of the questions which are addressed. There are so many backstories and so many ideas surfacing and coming to the fore. And it's very good for there to be this robust cut and thrust of question and reply. When it comes to the principle of international legality and international law, they apply to everyone. And I'm surprised that really that's the first question, which has really been outside of the Middle East, strictu sensu. And of course, one can expect a multiplicity of questions from this committee of AFET. I think that, of course, the core of our efforts has to be directed towards the Middle East and the Mediterranean. It's not just Israel and Palestine, because there are at least two conflicts needing to be addressed. And I think that the regional approach is no doubt the appropriate approach. The ceasefire was very difficult to arrive at in Cairo at the end of August. And this must be the beginning of a new process. In Cairo, and President Abbas will be there. There is to be a donors conference to rebuild Gaza in material terms, physically, but everything else. At the same time, we must solve the Israeli-Arab conflict. And I think that the Arab project there is very useful, and we can build on what we're seeing unfold. I think that is very interesting because the priorities which emerge in the course of the questions could often come as a surprise, not least to the candidate. Next is Jean-Luc Mélenchon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mélenchon, si vous voulez.
Thank you very much. Madam, I'd like to ask you about a number of events that are disturbing global equilibrium. I'm surprised you haven't spoken about climate change, for example. That's one major factor in terms of all the countries that are affected, not least by energy issues and migration. So what will your points be that you make in Paris? Then the second one that's a major problem is the role of the dollar, which is effectively causing disruption in all international trade flows. I think there's effectively an agreement between the BRICS countries and South Africa, which have attempted to set up an equivalent to the IMF and the World Bank between themselves, but Russia and China have decided to trade in their national currencies, which has then meant that the dollar is actually threatened in terms of its hegemony in the global currency markets.
Monsieur Mélenchon.
Thank you very much. Yes, I did mention climate change as one of the major global challenges that we face. Perhaps it was when I was talking in English right at the outset, I'm not sure, but I'm sure that I did mention it because I firmly believe that it is one of the major challenges that we face. Just a few weeks back, I was at the General Assembly in the United Nations and I attended an event where the European Union was represented by the current commissioner responsible for climate change, and the foreign ministers from a certain number of European countries were there. And the format of that meeting was interesting. And I think as far as I am concerned, and my remit, my portfolio, if you decide that I should be appointed, will obviously involve working with foreign ministers, environment ministers, a wide range of NGOs and organisations from civil society who are all engaged in working in this area, because they are a source of information. They are a source of inputs, of resources, but a huge amount of expertise. And in Paris next year, I think we must make sure that we are in the vanguard. We don't want to be playing a catch-up game. Therefore, we need to do everything we can in Lima in December. And thereafter, we need to reappraise and review and make sure that we do everything that remains outstanding prior to Paris, because we can't possibly allow ourselves to run the risk of failing. After all, it's a question of more than climate change. It's a question of international security, as you've rightly said. It isn't just an environmental issue. It's a challenge to humanity.
Thank you. Herr Messerich.
Thank you, Chair. Madam High Representative Designate, I'm here. I was glad to hear that you advocate a differentiated policy in our neighbourhood, both east and south. Now, I, for one, believe that the Eastern Neighbourhood policy is at best a half success, and that's a deliberate understatement on my behalf. It clearly needs serious rethinking. Now, other commissioner designates almost uniformly claim that strategic level rethinking is actually your responsibility, and they are willing to follow your lead. So who should be doing that rethinking? Whom should we ask 5 to 6 months from now to have a report in this committee about that strategic rethinking? And additionally, a practical question. I'm sure that you have heard that our co-chair Rebecca Harms have been declared persona non grata in Russia a few days ago, and the Russian authorities referred to a whole list of such personages. Do you have official information on that, and what do you plan to do about it? Thank you.
I thank you for the two questions. Who should you ask for the strategic rethinking? I guess me, yes. I can confirm that. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to do that all alone, closed in my office, isolated from the rest of the world. I take it as a positive sign, the fact that we want all to work in a team. Teamwork, I think, is going to be the crucial word. But yes, we will need leadership and responsibility in this teamwork, and that's, I guess, if you will agree on the indication, my responsibility to do that. On the case of Rebecca, yes, I am informed, not more than you, probably less than you, as not being in the position or in the capacity at the moment. What I know is that I completely share the words that President Schulz said. That is completely unacceptable. Not only that there is this list, but that the list is were not made public and not justified. So yes, I think we will have, obviously, if I was in that place, and when and if I will be in that position, for sure deal with the Russian authorities to make sure that that doesn't happen. And in case that is openly explained and justified, so that we can engage on a confrontation on that. Thank you very much. And let me mention one thing, by the way. I think that, I still have some time, I think that parliamentary diplomacy is a key. And wherever I will be able to facilitate, me personally or the service, access or missions of MEPs to countries to visit, count on me. On the other hand, I would ask you in return to coordinate before going and after coming back for planning, for understanding well who is better to visit without any kind of interference, obviously, but for all of us to know everything so that we coordinate, and also for having the feedback, because the fruit of the parliamentary diplomacy is also going to be extremely important for my work. So that we establish a way of working together on parliamentary diplomacy, for me, in a structured way, is going to be very important. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank, Ulrike Lunacek.
Thank you, Ulrike Lunacek.
Madame Mogherini, in your written answers, you have said you intend to use human rights as a compass in your work. So 2 questions on human rights. You mentioned women, media, freedom of religion. I'd like to know from you, how will you want to strengthen the rights of ethnic minorities and of sexual minorities in your work? The second one, in our eastern neighborhood, there is gas-rich Azerbaijan as a country where repression, especially against media, against civil society, has increased over the recent months. So how will you want to respond to improve the protection of basic rights and fundamental freedoms? And I have one last question that refers to your positioning as an Italian foreign minister promoting South Stream. You probably know that this parliament has pronounced itself against this project because it's not a European one. How will you act as High Representative and Vice President? Because I do hope you would like in the future to be remembered as Lady CFSP and not as Lady South Stream. Thank you.
For sure. Even the lady creates some problems to me, I have to admit here. So if we can find another way, I would be. But we have a couple of weeks to work on that. If you will vote on the composition of the Commission, but for sure, I will take this first because it's very important to me to clarify. I think that the political conditions for South Stream, in any case, are not there at the moment. And that relates to the situation in Ukraine and to our relations with Russia. Having said that, all infrastructural projects has to have a solid and full legal basis. So if and when the political conditions might go back or go to a normal, big if, then I think the technical talks might restart and see if they manage to get to fulfill completely the legal basis that has to be fulfilled. I hope this clarifies completely my thinking. What I said last, when I was here, was misinterpreted by some, I think it was journalists, I don't think it was some members of parliament. I said that the Southern Corridor should be our priority, and some people connected Southern Corridor with South Stream, which is actually 2 completely different projects. As you know, Southern Corridor refers to TAP, which comes to the Azerbaijan issue. No easy issue here. I think that just because and just as we are investing a lot on energy with Azerbaijan, and they know very well that it is going to be crucial also for our diversification of sources and routes, I think we need even more to stress the need for respecting, especially human rights in the fields of media and political activists and people. On the ethnic minorities and sexual minorities, sexual orientation, I will do my best everywhere to promote this. That is part of my DNA. I do it because I believe in that, not because it's a clause or it's a must. And in particular on the sexual orientation, I believe that on certain countries, but also in certain countries in Europe, we will need to work quite a lot. Thank you.
Danke sehr. Reinhard Bütikofer.
Thank you, President. Mrs. Mogherini, as Vice President, you're going to be responsible for the Instrument for Stability and Peace. This instrument now lacks 70 million for this year and 60 million in payments for next year. urgent measures of peace building and conflict prevention had to be given up or postponed due to a lack of credits. How will you make sure that the ISP is properly funded? And the second question, which relevance do you give to EU relations with ASEAN and ASEAN member states? Thank you.
On the budget, I will, if I become High Representative, work very closely with Kristalina, and we have actually started already to informally discuss on the ways in which we could face this. And let me say that knowing her background, her dedication in the field, this gives me reasonable hopes that we can understand very well together what is needed to be tackled immediately and what can be tackled afterwards. In general, we have a problem with the budget, as you know much better than I do. That doesn't only refer to that instrument, but on this year commitments. In particular, let me stress that the commitments we have on that instrument and on all external actions is particularly crucial for our credibility. And I think the Commission, as such, will be very much aware of this. And I count on also your work to try and find a reasonable solution for this year. And then we have the review in 2016, where we will be able maybe to reflect together, if needed, some sort of review on the budget as a whole. Then we will have also another part of the budget discussion to deal with, referring to the 5% cuts to the structures, but that is another story, and we will face it probably in a different format. On the relation with ASEAN, as you know, there was a head of delegation appointed, I think, a couple of weeks ago. There, I think it is a very positive development. And I think that is going to be one of the strategic work that we will have to do in the coming years. Regionalism in Asia, as it is in Latin America, I think is crucial. And the lack of regional efficient or appropriate to the needs means in Asia has sometimes been of a problematic nature. So I think that investing on the relationship with ASEAN is going to be extremely important.
Fabio Castaldo.
Thank you, Chair. Signora Mogherini.
Mrs. Mogherini, the strategic framework has pushed human rights in all areas of external policy, without exception, and that's all to the good. But we do know that this very noble and laudable enunciation of principles is sometimes sacrificed because of the importance of the economic relationship. Does that mean that we are going to become selective and inconsistent with regard to our values? You, of course, will be coordinating the whole cluster of external relations commissioners, and you are the one who can ensure consistency and coherence, and I wish you all the best in that. There is Annex 13, Protocol 13, and the abolition of the death penalty, so that no one can be sentenced to the death penalty. Now, that's one of the things that we are trying to do. And we're also trying to do the TTIP, which is an economic agreement. Is it possible to reconcile these conflicting interests? Thank you. Well, that's really two questions. Well, thank you very much for your good wishes there, and for wishing me the best of luck. I think I'll need that. The work on the death penalty, I believe, this is one of the calling cards of the European Union, and we really do have to always hand them out. When it comes to the negotiations, trade negotiations, those are negotiations. And I believe that we are going to have to keep up the struggle on the universal moratorium on the death penalty. I think it's essential that we do all of this together with all our international partners. There are countries which are not abolitionist, but which are can accept the idea of a moratorium. And this is incremental. It's step by step, and we've got to do this by a process, if you like, of contagion. And I think that the European Union has got a major contribution to make in this area. And at the risk of repeating myself, we must have an alliance of with civil society in the various countries. Let me take the Italian example. That was an Italian asking the question. We, in Italy, at my initiative with the foreign minister, have a task force on the death penalty. There is a forthcoming vote at the United Nations General Assembly on the moratorium, and we work with 3 major international NGOs, no names, no pack drill, but this is synergies between the European Union, the member states, NGO associations, and movements of various kinds across the world. All of us can put together a strategy for a moratorium and then the abolition. And I think that this is something which is within reach, provided we all push in the same direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Madam, the Member States have committed themselves to establishing a common foreign and security policy, including the progressive framing of a common defence policy. Do you plan to have that achieved? Do you plan to have achieved that by the end of your term of office? And do you accept that at that moment there will be no such thing as any Member State having independent control over their own foreign policy? Furthermore, would you accept that means there can no longer be any place for neutrality, such as that practised by the Republic of Ireland? Second question, how can you claim to seek an effective EU foreign policy during ongoing internal disputes, not least that between my own country and Spain over Gibraltar? On September the 19th, 2 Spanish Eurofighters illegally invaded Gibraltar airspace, flying across the bow of a passenger airline during its landing on one of the world's trickiest runways, thus endangering civilian lives. Do you join me in condemnation of such action by Spain? And what will you do to support British sovereignty in Gibraltar? Thank you.
I'll take the first part of the question. I don't believe that shaping a common policy, a common foreign security policy, a common defence policy, means that member states have to give up their own. Even because they wouldn't anyway. But this doesn't mean that we have to just limit ourselves to take the rest. What I'm trying to share is the need for us to create a common sense of our European interests that we can better defend and promote with a European common strategy where the different national policies might fit in. Does that mean that we will not have initiatives on foreign policy by member states? I'm not that naive. And maybe it wouldn't be good, because we would need some initiative also to fit in the European foreign policy framework. What we need is a common direction, a common vision, some common action on some shared interests and values, and to work on shaping that together. What I was meaning by ownership is this. If we get to the last second, facing a crisis, and we need to agree on a text, then we have not a foreign policy, a common foreign policy. Then we have 28 foreign policies and a common minimum denominator, which is already something. But we can do much better than that. We need to do better than that because it's needed by our own citizens and by the citizens around us. So I know that's why I said it's going to be my first task. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be the most difficult task that I'm going to have in the next 5 years. But I really believe that we can be proud Europeans and useful Europeans to our European citizens and the citizens around us in the world if we manage to play at full our global role.
Madam Mogherini, Commissioner designate, I would like to bring to your attention that worldwide more than 15 million people consume illicit opioids, that is opium, morphine and heroin. A large majority use heroin, which is the most lethal. Most users die each year from problems related to heroin use, and greater numbers are forced to seek treatment for this addiction than for any other illicit drug. In addition, heroin is the drug most associated with use of injections, which bring about a host of acute and chronic health problems, including the transmission of blood-borne diseases such as HIV, AIDS and hepatitis C. Between 10,000 and 20,000 people die from Europe every year due to that infection. Beyond health's impact, the illicit opioid industry also has a detrimental effect on stability and security in a number of places, including through funding it provides for insurgents in production areas, particularly in Afghanistan. My question is this: how do you propose to protect the citizens of Europe from this dangerous drug problem which blights so many lives and damages society?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
This is one of the issues on which it will be useful to work as a team in the Commission, because obviously it has aspects related to different policies and different actions we might take internally and externally. I would take one specific point on Afghanistan. It's another issue that I was surprised nobody has raised so far, so I will take the chance, saying that that is going to be one of the aspects on which we will need to work together with the new Afghan government. That was probably that was for sure not tackled in an effective way during the last 13 years. And this is going to be crucial, as you said, because it's a source of financement, because it's a source of destabilization, and because it has an effect all over the world. But starting from there, I think we will need to work on this for sure, and not only in Afghanistan, obviously, in other parts of the world. So yes, I think this is going to be part of my job in the next 5 years, if you will decide so.
Aymeric Choprat.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame.
Thank you, Chair. Madam High Representative Designate, the American Vice President Joe Biden recently said at the University of Harvard that the United States had imposed, I repeat, imposed, this was the term he used, on the Europeans sanctions against Russia. And I well remember your balanced words and the wise words on Russia. But today we hear talk about the priority being the transatlantic partnership, NATO, the logic of enlargement towards Turkey, Azerbaijan, and so on and so forth. Now, Madam High Representative Designate, I think that many colleagues here would be reassured if you could tell us that as High Representative, it will be for an independent Europe and not a kind of transatlantic bloc, which is really ruled by the Americans. Thank you very much. Quite so.
Beaucoup mieux que Lady whatever else. Premièrement, petite.
Firstly, a point of detail. I was not suggesting enlargement to those countries. I was simply saying that the policy of enlargement for the countries of the Western Balkans and Turkey has so far been a success. And I said that I imagine that would be the case in future as well. But of course, we have very good partnership relations and neighbourhood relations. And I think we've got to work on each country separately and individually. Now, I read the words of Vice President Biden. I was slightly surprised. We have worked together Mr. Biden has worked with the Europeans in a dialogue which has involved not just the Americans, but other countries which have taken the same attitude of sanctions vis-à-vis Russia, for example, Japan or Canada or other countries besides, which have taken those decisions. And there has been a global effort which has been coordinated internationally. But I can say from direct experience, as the Italian minister over these months, that the decisions taken in the European Council have never been easy, but they've always been independent and self-standing and based on Europeans talking, European discussions. And it's worth noting. I think that is now something which is only normal amongst us. And that is the way things ought to be. As I say, this was a difficult decision to take for many countries and many governments. But it's always been a joint process of reflection entre nous. And I think that the value of European unity over this period has been key. Thank you very much.
Gill.
Thank you, Chair. In your opening remarks, you made a reference to Asia. Would you agree that strong relations with Asia are crucial for the EU, not least because Asia accounts for roughly 60% of the world's population and 30% of the world's GDP, and a number that would increase given the economies in the region maintain their current growth rate? At the same time, Asia is a home to a number of hotspots that have the potential to spark conflicts that could easily draw in the rest of the world. Yet Asia is hardly ever on our radar here. So I'd like to raise 3 points. Firstly, we have a new government in India, led by Prime Minister Modi, and it is of concern that the EU is nowhere to be found on his agenda, while meetings with presidents of China, the US, Japan have all been on top of his priorities. And then when we look at the EU response, a decade has passed since we launched the EU-India strategic partnership, which has failed to produce the results. And
Thanks. Yes, I think relations with Asia are going to be strategic for the European Union. I think the challenge there is to show Asia that for them, their relationship with us is going to be strategic. We have so much competition there that I think we will need to put a lot of efforts and attention jointly. And again, Asia is such a continent that the parliamentary diplomacy can be extremely important there. We need to make us relevant for them as much as they can be relevant for us. Coming to India, I believe that having a new government in India, apparently very much concentrated on reaching out and establishing links to the rest of the world, is an opportunity. In particular when we have a new leadership in Europe. And I think we should work on this opportunity to strengthen the links.
Pagnot.
Mr. Pagnot.
La frontière algéro-marocaine.
High Representative Designate, the border between Algeria and Morocco has been closed since 1994. And there doesn't seem to be any signs of improvement in that situation. And there's a real blockage there. Cooperation there would, however, benefit the population in the southern Mediterranean, but also Europe, because we would have new perspectives for partnership. And Maghreb is a bloc. And a lot of percentage points of GDP are really lost for these countries because of this blockage. And of course, we have Western Sahara as well, which is a conflict. Now, how can the EU try to contribute to resolving these conflicts in the long term between Morocco and Algeria, and how can we to contribute to build a Maghreb Arab Union? Because at the time there were prospects for peace when it was initially envisaged. And what solution do you see for a greater role for the EU in Maghreb?
Finito.
C'est pas ma faute. La flexibilité allemande.
Well, we all know about the famous German flexibility.
I'm not a diplomat.
It's result orientated.
Si vous voulez, je peux terminer.
No.
I can conclude if you wish.
Je pense que non, la question est très sérieuse.
Now, this is of course a very serious question. So, jokes aside, it is a paradox that the least integrated region should be the Maghreb, because it's one that would really need regional integration. And when we see work, for example, that we're trying to do in Libya with neighboring countries, we see that it's a very difficult context with the 5+5, for example, a format I mentioned earlier. We see that this really leads to added value when we do this work, in spite of bilateral difficulties. But Europe, of course, should support the UN's work in terms of trying to come up with a long-term, sustainable, comprehensive policy to overcome the conflict in Western Sahara. And we, of course, needed to look at what we have in common so that we can work together. We have the practice of working together, and that facilitates the matter. And we, of course, have to work on the bilateral relations we have with Algeria and also Morocco in order to signal that there is added value in working together. And I also think that without a true regional approach, it would be very difficult to come up with a real solution to the crisis in Libya. And so here we really need to take more time to work on this, to share perspectives, and I am convinced that it would be one of the top priorities in coming years in terms of security and stability. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Sie haben erwähnt, dass wir bei
Thank you very much. You've mentioned the fact that we haven't yet fully utilised the possibilities of the Lisbon Treaty. How would you ensure that the member states promote better understanding of the possibilities of structured cooperation amongst themselves? What sort of commitment will you give to try to promoting the abilities the Europeans have to promoting disarmament, for example, and to trying to get sure that there's some real progress in terms of arms and technology? You talked about the Defence Agency. How will you ensure that the projects there are actually used so that the member states utilise the full potential of this agency? You talked about Africa conflict and the Africa peace procedure. How do you envisage getting that off the ground? And how do you assess European security strategy? How do you think that it will be possible to produce a proper white paper, and when, on European defence?
No, but I'm not going to use all the 10 minutes. I thank you for the question. I would start from structured cooperation. As you might have noticed, that is in my written answers. And I intend to use this 5 years to see if there are the political conditions to use that tool that is there in the treaty and that I think might be useful to utilize. I know it's a very sensitive issue for member states, but I believe that if the conditions would be there, that would be my task to explore that. the Defense Agency, I completely share your point. Also there's a huge potential, and my point will be to work together with the ministers of defense that are in the board that I will chair as a head of the Defense Agency, how to move forward concretely and in a shared approach. And this is coming up, I think, in the very first months of my mandate. As I said, there's a Defense Council on November. There's some changes in the Defense Agency coming up in the beginning of the year. So that is going to be one of the things on which I might not come with concrete elements today, also because 2 minutes would make it quite challenging, but definitely very high on the agenda. Another thing that I would probably do different from the past is playing this defense role at full, because I think it's time that we develop also that part of the work. There was a last question that was on the security strategy. Yes. You mentioned that as a paper. I said previously, I am not at the moment. I don't come to you at the moment with a clear idea if that has to be a paper, a security strategy, if that has to be a process like a white book or a livre blanc that we open up and we take some more time for developing with a broad discussion, if that is just a strategic reflection that we understand how to flexibly adopt. So I don't have the format, but I have the need to develop a strategic thinking together.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dear Madam High Representative, Vice President Designate Cara Federica, the European Parliament welcomes very much your commitment for strategic rethinking, strategies and coordination of our EU global policies, and I'm convinced the Parliament will fully back you in your efforts. Now, looking to the Middle East and the crisis rising everywhere, seems that the crisis reached a very high level, which poses serious problems for our European security and energy supply. And after the last summer, most severe crisis in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you will next week join probably the Conference of Donors in Cairo. What the next? You mentioned, and I welcome very much your sentence, Europe should be a player and not a payer in this region. What is your strategy for the peace negotiations, and what strategy for finally going for peace in the Middle East? Thank you.
In 2 minutes. First, we have to be there. We have to be there because for the first time ever, there's a need and a request for European Union to be there from all sides. Internal different sides, within the Palestinian side, within the Israeli side, and in the Palestinian and in the Israeli side, and with the regional actors. The Egyptians ask us to be there, the others ask us to be there. So I see that for once, we might have a crucial role in facilitating. I think that the talks have been going on, the peace processes are going on so long that if we get to the political will to find a solution to the conflict, the technical solution is there. The point is political will and political leadership in the two fields and within the two fields. That's why I believe that our role can be of putting a political pressure. We are big payers, so we might have some leverage in terms of incentives and disincentives. We need to use them to push the political will of the leaderships, and we need to strengthen the political leadership internally. First of all, allowing the Palestinian Authority to rule Gaza. I take it as a very positive sign. The news, I don't know if that is confirmed, that it's going to happen, that next Thursday the coalition government, the cohesion government of the Palestinian Authority is meeting in Gaza for the first time. We should support and make things like that possible. There's a lot of competencies that the European Union can put at the disposal of the Palestinian Authority to rule Gaza, to reform, to check that the reconstruction doesn't go in a different direction, because we have to take into consideration the Israeli concerns about the fact that the reconstruction has to be a reconstruction and not rearming. But all the instruments that we can put at the disposal of supporting the practical agreements is there. But first of all, we need the political will, because I believe that the crisis that we have had in this summer could have said to the different public opinions that there is no return to the status quo possible and that they have to move forward.
Gracias, Presidente. Señora Mogherini,
Thank you, Chair. Madam Mogherini, the most important strategic relations with the EU are the ones we have with the US, particularly now in this current difficult international context. And this relationship with the US will be even more robust if the TTIP negotiations come to fruition. So how can we see that happening? Now, on the other hand, how can we make Washington see the EU not just as a relevant economic and trade partner, but as a political player? And then also, you talked about prioritizing relationships with Latin America. And this is, of course, very important at the international level. We're talking about an integration process. In the regional level, we also share democratic values and principles with most of these countries. And there is an increased presence of China there right now. So what are you going to do with the upcoming CELAC summit in June next year in order to boost that relationship? And I also welcome the focus you're going to afford to the Mediterranean countries and our neighbors there. Thank you.
Credo che la relazione.
Thank you. I believe that the relations with the Americans are strategic and also very political. It was a question of who do you call? That was the big question. And I think that is very useful. If we're going to really get the most out of our transatlantic relationship. Only recently, a year or so, in Europe, there was a wave of panic because of the so-called pivot to Asia. In other words, the fear being that the Americans were becoming more concerned by the Pacific Basin. And now we're talking about the centrality of the Atlantic Alliance, because we have a problem on the European territory of security, but not just security. And I think, therefore, that it's important for us to get a mature relationship. In this relationship, there's no need to have a kind of panic. Of course, the Americans will be duly interested in the Pacific region, but there are things we have to do together globally. The European Union and the United States together can have a relationship vis-à-vis other parts of the world, big global challenges such as climate change, the migratory flows, human rights, and many other sectors where that partnership is fundamental. And there's much we can do in addressing the challenges of Ebola as well. Now, on the TTIP negotiations, I know that that's at the centre of attention. I'm convinced this can be a strategic instrument for external policy, not just commercial policy. I think that there are understandable anxieties about that being a good agreement, and we'll need to do justice to take time over the negotiations to get a good TTIP agreement at the end of the day. And let's not forget the words of President Juncker in plenary in July. It's not just any old agreement, it's got to be a good agreement with very clear demands. And I believe that it's useful for the Parliament to be kept informed on a blow-by-blow basis. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame Mogherini.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Mogherini. The Gulf Cooperation Council and all its individual members are participating in the military coalition. And this is important from a military but also a psychological point of view. I'd like to know how you evaluate the potential of this strategic partnership in terms of security and defence. And I'd like to know what you think about this in terms of the Middle East itself, but also in a wider context. And I wonder in what way you think this alliance might evolve. I wonder whether you think the Gulf Cooperation Council will become an important trading partner for us. For example, the European Union has relations with the Gulf countries thanks to the 88 agreement, and since 2008 there have been negotiations on free trade issues. I wonder whether you intend to try to develop this partnership further, not least in the context of the energy crisis in Europe. I'd like to know how you see relations between the two groups of countries evolving. Thank you. Thank you very much. My evaluation of the involvement of these countries in the coalition is really something that I describe as participation in a coalition, not a military coalition. I wouldn't describe it as a military coalition because there are countries that are involved in it which are not participating in any way in any of the military operations, but are nevertheless party to the coalition. And I think that General Allen, who is, to the best of my knowledge, still in Iraq and is in charge of coordinating the coalition efforts, would share my view, which is that it's vital to have not just effective military action, but to have effective action across the board in so many areas in this part of the world, in terms of finance and resources, policy, humanitarian assistance. I think the participation of the Gulf Cooperation Council is extremely important. And I think it's something that we should value because it gives us an opportunity to change all the dynamics at regional level. It's not something that's self-evident. It's certainly not simple. Indeed, we've seen recently how complex it is because people have competing and different interests. There's clearly a lot of work to be done in reconciling divergent interests. All that being said, though, the fact that these countries are participating in this coalition does illustrate that they are aware of the fact that it's a problem that they need to face up to as a regional group. And I think that this is an important realization too. And it's not Iraq 3. It's not a clash of civilizations either. It's not a cultural clash, and it's not a conflict of a religious nature either. They've come together in order, inter alia, to try to stem the activities of a terrorist group. In terms of the Gulf countries, I represented Catherine Ashton as the Italian minister at a Gulf Cooperation Council meeting, and we talked precisely about how we could revive our partnership economically and commercially.
For the last two questions, to keep the time. Tune Keller.
Madam High Representative in petto, you impressed me with a sincere will to efficiently run the common foreign policy, but you have yet to convince me how to stop Mr. Putin in real time. EU sanctions are lagging behind Putin's moves. It is Moscow who sets the agenda while we react but can't stop or prevent, not to speak of restoring the pre-aggression situation. Don't you think that we need first to address and clearly condemn the very roots of Russian aggression, the scandalous doctrine of defending so-called compatriots abroad by military invasion? Ignoring this racist doctrine has resulted in the present situation. Second, defending Ukraine. How can we justify refusing arms to a friendly country under attack while allowing a member state to deliver modern assault warships to the very aggressor? If this is not crossing the red line of European principles and solidarity, then what it is? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that that was quite clear by all of us, not just by me, but by some of us, but by all of us, from the very beginning of this crisis, where the responsibility lies and how dangerous it is, not only for our continent, but for the rest of the world, to change borders by force. And I think that is the basis for all the decisions that we have taken in the last months. So no doubt among us, I think we should be very clear, being whatever our political family or our member states, our personal views, no doubt that occupying or annexing part of a country, changing the borders by force, and having troops in a different country is by all means a violation of international principles that we all agreed on and that are the basis of our common work. The point is, how do we make it effective for Putin to stop? And to this question, I think it would be very fruitful to have a real and in-depth discussion. First of all, with our friends from Ukraine. My point of reference there is working with the Ukrainians, because in the end, they are the ones that are there. They are the ones that have to deal with the conflict on their territory, and they are the ones for whom we are trying to develop a strategy to stop this. We have adopted the sanctions. Have the sanctions been effective on Russian economy? Yes. Yes. I think Russian economy is starting to suffer quite a lot in that. So if the question is, as the choices that we have made so far being effective on Russian economy? Yes. Are they effective on Russian political decisions? I think we still have a question mark there. And the Ukrainians themselves have a question mark there, as they now continue to say, we have to go on working, try to work on the political solution. So my point of reference there would be to support President Poroshenko's efforts and agree with them steps that we take.
Thank you. Alois Peterle.
Buonasera, Madam Commissioner Designate. As the last speaker, I would wish you are not only a high but a very strong representative and Vice President of the European Commission. You mentioned Western Balkans. Which will be your priorities in cooperation with Commissioner Hahn in order to change quite asymmetric picture of the Balkan countries with regard to their European perspective? Do you agree that the EU has to be ready when a candidate country is ready? How do you see Turkey in this context? You have already mentioned India. Could you tell us a little bit more what you want to undertake in order to deepen cooperation with India, which I consider more and more strategically important partner of the EU? Of course, I have a similar question concerning Japan as well. Grazie.
Grazie. On the Balkans, thank you for the fact that the last question allows me to talk about that. I think it wouldn't be fair to have one priority in the Balkans, because the added value of the EU path for all the Western Balkan countries is that the regional dimension of it, and also the interlinks that are there, potentially. It's easier to go from one of the capital cities to Vienna or to Frankfurt rather than to travel in between, which doesn't make any sense because it's a region. So we risk to duplicate the fact that it's not an integrated region in itself if we do not work on that. So I wouldn't put one priority before the others. But I have very clear in mind that we have very different situations we have to tackle in a very different ways. I would say that priority number one is Bosnia and Herzegovina. After the elections, to make sure that the Compact for Growth is implemented and we manage to find a way forward there. The talks between Serbia and Kosovo, we have to they're going on the technical level very well. We have to revise it politically as soon as we have a government in Pristina. Albania is a unique chance, I think, for implementing reforms. Montenegro is the very first of the list. And on FIROM, on the name issue, I believe that the political will for solving it should be found. And I hope I don't forget any of them. But is the EU... I talked about Turkey before. I mentioned that in my opening remarks as one of the countries on which we should go on the enlargement. Should the EU be ready when they are ready? I think we should be ready together. The real challenge is to make this policy work for reforms there, not because. With no paternalizing attitude. It's in our interest, even before than in their interest, that this reform process goes on steadily. So I would say that we need to be ready together.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Mogherini, you have the floor for your final statement.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I apologize. I understand that I was the only one in the hearings not providing you and the interpreters a written text for the opening remarks. So imagine how little written I have for the closing remarks that by nature comes as a result of a discussion